hot and sultry. Oh, okay, meeting's being recorded. All right. So we'll go ahead and do introductions of the council. We have a new member this evening that we would like to introduce. Why don't we go ahead and get started with that? His name is Richard Lujan, and he is the newest member of the council. And so, Rick, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what your interest is in the CPC.
You're on.
You're muted.
Yep, that's what I just found. So there we go. My name is Rick Lujan. I'm a native New Mexican, born and raised here. I've moved to Albuquerque in 1981, joined working for Sandia Labs in 84, and left them, came on back, and I've recently rejoined Sandia Labs as a controls and automation technologist. So my interest in joining the group is one of the things I would always, watch the news and see what's going on and the rising crime rate and such like this. And, always lament to my wife, why is this going on? And my dad always taught me, always light a candle instead of cursing the darkness. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to see how I can help decrease the problem between us versus them mentality within APD versus, the community. I believe that we've got a good community. We have an excellent police force. They've come to my help several times. I'm with the Neighborhood Watch. Whenever we have a problem in our neighborhood, we make a call, and they're very quickly will respond. We've had several break-ins. We've had several drive-bys, which is astonishing to me after living in where I lived for 22 years. And recently we've had a lot of drive-bys. It seems that Grisham Park, which is in the northeast off of Carlisle and Candelaria, attracts a lot of problems. We've even seen that the stop signs are targets. And we picked up casings and different casings and such like that. And APD has always been there for us. So thank you for the opportunity to join the group. My background is I'm an ex-balloonist. I'm helped to start the Landowner Relations Committee, which we field complaints from landowners, from balloonists, and we brought them together to communicate and work things out. And I hope that we can do the same thing, is improve our communication, improve our trust issues, and to improve, we're all in this together. That's the biggest thing. We're all in this together. We're coming off the pandemic, that we've been isolated. We've been scared to death about even stepping foot out of our houses, and understanding that, we're only going to get through this together. And that's what I feel that we can do on this committee, and we can do within Albuquerque. We're blessed to live here. Now, that's one of the big things. You can 5 minutes away, you can walk up a mountain. 10 minutes away, you can walk in a river. Come on, we're blessed to be here, and that's why I've stayed. I've had offers all across the United States and Europe to move, and my kids are here. My son is a supervisor with UNM at the landscaping committee, on the landscaping crew. My wife also works for UNM. She is with Maxwell Museum. She's the unit administrator. So we have a lot of ties, a lot of, no grandkids yet. Looks like we're going to be, cats and dogs for our grandkids, but, we're going to make it. So thank you again. And let's see how this moves on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Now what I'd like to do is introduce the rest of the council. So if you could just give us a quick bio. I'm going to start with my screen here, and Roy is the first one.
I'm Roy Turpin. I'm a retired city employee, retired as Deputy Director of Family and Community Services Department, but much more important, I worked for APD for 22 years. I was the director. I left in 2006, and I was the director of the Planning and Policy Development Division. And I've been interested in community policing, and I've been a member on this council for 6 months. So welcome all visitors.
Thanks, Roy. Francine?
Hi everyone, it's great to be here tonight. My name is Francine Lopez. I am a student at the University of New Mexico, and I've been a part of the Northeast Community Policing Council for 5 months.
Okay, thank you. Kenneth?
Hi, I'm Kenneth Armijo. I'm a resident of Northeast Heights and also a board member on this Northeast CPC Council, originally from the Belen Socorro area. Yeah, I've been on the council since about August of last year. I've been enjoying all of the good dialogues we've had between APD and the community, and I feel like things are moving up. So thanks for having us.
Thanks, Kenneth. Willie?
I no longer am the newest member of the Northeast Community Council, so I would like to welcome Rich to take over that role. I've been on since February. I'm a semi-retired geriatrician and have found that I'm learning a great deal about how the police and this whole system works, and it's been very enjoyable, and I'm glad I'm a member, so welcome.
All right, thank you. And I think we have Dina on, she's on her phone, so I just wanted to recognize Dina Soto. She is also one of the members of the council. So who are we? What do we do? So I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs here to give you an idea about the community policing councils. So Albuquerque Community Policing Councils work inclusively and collaboratively with the Albuquerque Police Department, community leaders, business owners, and community members to develop a constitutional community policing approach that identifies and implements strategies for reducing crime, addressing public safety issues, and fostering trust between the Albuquerque Police Department and all community members. Through regular public meetings, programs, and our recommendation process, the CPCs provide opportunities for communication between community members and the police department, where collaboration and cooperation can build consensus toward establishing and maintaining an effective community policing structure. So that's who we are. That's kind of what we do. Okay, so getting to just a few items of business on the agenda. If there are any amendments to the agenda this evening, please, council members, say so. If not, could I get a motion to approve the agenda?
A motion.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 And amend and or approve the minutes from the May meeting.
I'll make a motion.
Are there
to
any
accept them.
amendments? Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, So what we're going to do tonight is just get right into the heart of the presentations. And we feel very fortunate to have these individuals here this evening to talk about community issues, to talk about police reform. I know that in several of the meetings, we have had people talk about the McClendon Settlement and how it has an impact on officers when they go out for calls for service. And so there was some confusion about how this settlement coincides with APD, because it was really, I think, part of the MDC. There was an issue at MDC. And so we have a couple individuals here tonight that may be able to clarify a little bit about McClendon. So the groups that are here tonight, the Community Coalition, APD Forward, and ACLU of New Mexico are part of what's considered the amici for the CASA. And basically what the amici is a group of individuals or organizations that are stakeholders within the settlement, the CASA settlement. And so they have a different perspective. They have different goals, different ideas. I think they come prepared tonight to speak to those. And what we'd like to know a little bit, is a little bit more about the Community Coalition and how it operates, APD Forward, who they are, what their goals are, what they feel like their accomplishments are. And we also have an individual, her name is Elaine Maestas, and I'm assuming from emails that we will start with Elaine for her presentation, and then if there are questions or if other individuals from the amici groups want to join in, clarify, or make statements, feel free to do that. This time is your own. Like I said, we're interested in everything that you have to say. We're interested in the work that you've been doing, what you see needs to be done, and possibly how we can partner with you to accomplish some of your goals and maybe help us accomplish some of ours. So I will read Elaine's bio and let her get started. So Elaine has lived in New Mexico her entire life.
Actually, it's Baron
Yes.
Jones.
Yeah. Can I
Oh,
go
go ahead.
first, because I want to set up APD Forward. Elaine is actually my colleague at ACLU. So, but yeah. So very
Absolutely, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, and excuse the confusion. But very briefly, for those of you who
No,
aren't
it's
familiar,
fine.
the APD Forward coalition, the seeds of this coalition, was planted in 2010, right? In 2010, if you all are lifelong residents of Albuquerque, you will know that in 2010 and 2011, there was a spate of 37 police shootings that left 24 people dead in the city, right? So the ACLU of New Mexico worked with our community partners to sort of see what we can do to end this, end these unnecessary tragedies. The APD Forward coalition, we worked behind the scenes. We worked with the Department of Justice to sort of move the city of Albuquerque to a position of inviting the U.S. Department of Justice here to investigate those police shootings. And the Department of Justice released this findings, and my air conditioner broke, so I put on a shirt so I can look nice, but I'm sweltering right here, so excuse me. But the APD Forward, and it just made me lose my train of thought. But the U.S. Department of Justice findings from that investigation, finding letters were released, and I believe April 2014, about 3 weeks after the very public killing of James Boyd in the Foothill. For those of you all who aren't familiar, James Boyd was an unhoused individual camping on public land, and and he lost his life sort of unnecessarily. So that led the the ACLU and many of our community partners, about 37 organizations, to get together to form a formal coalition so we can sort of look at it and follow and track the compliance with what was going to be a court-approved settlement agreement, right? And so we've been working behind the scenes for the last 6 years to sort of represent the community along with the McClendon folks and the community coalition to sort of represent the community and keep APD on track with those reforms, right? And I think what Elena speak to most about today is where the department is at from our point of view with the settlement agreement. So I'm going to turn it over to Elaine because my idea was not to talk so much and give Elaine some space to talk about this stuff. So I'll turn it over to you, Elaine, and thanks for allowing me to speak, Vicki.
Okay.
Is Elaine here?
I don't see Elaine on.
Okay.
I don't see her on.
Okay, and if Elaine is on, right? So right now, and I'll just sort of jump into it because I believe Larry will sort of make that link between the McClendon work and the court-approved settlement agreement, often referred to as the CASA. And Mr. Matheson, Dean Matheson is on. So yeah, so we got plenty of people here to cover it. But so the in each these last two monitoring reports, it's sort of concerning to the ACLU of New Mexico and the APD Forward coalition that it seems that the department is backsliding in its efforts to comply with the settlement agreement. For years, and I understand the role COVID may have played in this, but for the last couple of years, the department had really done a great job of maintaining compliance with certain paragraphs of the court-approved settlement agreement that included public outreach, and I think Elaine's trying to get back on public outreach. Okay, yeah, she's back on somewhere, I think, but I don't see her. Okay, so I'll finish. And so what we learned with IMR 13 is that the department has sort of backslid, where it backslid in 12, right? But those were only a few percentage points. And I'll do some multitasking because I'm taking Elaine's part right here. And the provisions of the paragraphs of the court-approved settlement agreement that deals with training and community outreach, right? And that's concerning to us because throughout these 6 years that this process, I think it's been about 6 years that the monitoring has been actually going on, the APD was looking really, moving in the right direction. And I think once the previous administration changed hands, we were really sort of excited about the prospects of bringing some constitutional policing to Albuquerque. But what the Monitor's 13th report sort of shows is that there's still no will within the department to police itself. So that creates a serious problem with community trust. And then also the Monitor during his last monitoring period, he sort of highlighted that the department, and of course, I'm not on the monitoring team and I'm not privy to certain information, but according to the independent monitoring team, the department sort of works to mete out discipline harsher for non-law enforcement officials, which sort of indicate to some who follow and track this process that there's some sort of indifference when it comes to handling complaints against officers, right? This monitoring report was, and I'm just going off. Oh man, it is so hot. This monitoring report showed that there was a total 100% slowdown and the investigations for dealing with use of force, and it just sort of highlighted some serious, egregious oversight issues, including instances where the Force Review Board had agreed, and here's Elaine back on, right, and she may start over a little bit, had agreed that a couple of the cases that they're investigating had indications of excessive force, but the commanders who sat on that board did not want to refer that case to the Internal Affairs, right? Internal Affairs Force Division, right? So as long as we have things going on like that, there's always going to be a problem. And right, and I understand that there's a separation between the Albuquerque Police Officers Association and the department with itself, but I think when you look at things like the Crime Matters More campaign, it just sort of shows you how deep the divisions within the department goes when it comes to overseeing the reforms that the Department of Justice and the city of Albuquerque agreed to. Elaine, I'm gonna jump in, and so say what you have to say, and if you need anything, let me know. And Vicki and Kelly, please feel free to moderate, because I covered a lot, but I wasn't quite as organized as I wanted to be. So I'll give it to Elaine.
Yeah, sorry about
Okay.
that. Some technical issues, but I think I'm good. Can you all hear me okay?
Okay,
Yes.
yes.
Oh. Yeah, so thank you so much, Baron, for covering for me. So I just want to take a little bit of time to introduce myself. My name is Elaine Maestas, and I recently started with the ACLU of New Mexico as a police accountability strategist, and I am now a member of the APD Forward coalition with the ACLU. What brought me to this work was my own personal experience, the tragic loss of my sister Alicia Lucero. It was not at the hands of APD, but it was at the hands of BCSO. But this is kind of what really got me involved with the police reform aspect of work. And so my heart is really in this work. So I'm not too sure what Baron was able to cover, but I wanted to go over and really emphasize the importance that we should never forget why we are here in the first place with the CASA. The CASA came in after the tragic loss of family members of the citizens of Albuquerque. And I just want to really quick read the definition of homicide. The definition of homicide is the deliberate and unlawful killing of one person by another. This is what the death certificates read by the victims of, or by the individuals that are killed by police. So that should never be forgotten, and that's really why we're here within this whole process that we're in right now with the CASA. And I just want to, I know Baron touched a little bit on the APOA's claims. And so I just want to say that there are so many alarming concerns with this campaign, really, that really undermine the CASA and what it was intended to do. It's really an attack on the reform efforts. And I believe that this campaign is an ultimate counter CASA effect that we've really been seeing report after report with these monitor reports that have been coming out. And so something that we did mention in our letter to the court was we asked what the DOJ was going to be doing about the deliberate undermining of the reform efforts, and with the APOA's being a intervener within the process. And so we asked for the DOJ to move forward with sanctions against the APOA. And something that I just really want to highlight is, contrary to the APOA's claims, APD Forward believes that the reform effort placed under the CASA will only enhance APD's ability to protect the people of Albuquerque from crime. If APD officers are not professional or committed enough to conduct proper investigations of use of force, chances are that they are just as careless or incompetent when it comes to investigations of crimes. And the reluctance to hold officers accountable for violation of use of force policies surely stretches into other areas of policies. So just for a couple of examples, interviewing witnesses, conducting searches, you know, and things like that. So the subject of the CASA reforms might be around use of force, but at the end of the day, the CASA is really aimed at professionalizing the entire police department. And the CASA is really good for public safety. And again, I just want to bring us back to why we are here in the first place. We are here because many lives were lost needlessly at the hands of Albuquerque Police Department. And these are lives that we can never get back, but we can surely do something with the reform efforts that we have here. It's a roadmap to success.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Are there any questions in the chat? I don't see any questions for Elaine. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Now we will move to Alfred Matheson. Alfred is a member of the Community Coalition, and that is also part of the amici. So Alfred, could you please tell us a little bit about the Community Coalition, who you are, what your goals are, and some of your accomplishments?
Well, I was start about me. So I have been a member of the faculty of the law school and a former dean, and I retired in 2019, but I got involved with this process before that. I'm not a member of the Community Coalition. Representative Antonia Maestas and Stephen Torres and I represent the Community Coalition in this process.
Oh, okay.
All right, so they and they are. That's okay. I mean, the question is, who are we? So that's and so the coalition is just that, a group of organizations, activists who came together to participate in this process. And so part of it is sort of an understanding of this process and where we are. I am a corporate law professor. And so police reform is not something, was not in my bailiwick necessarily, but became involved in the process when seeing that when the city was negotiating the consent decree or the CASA with DOJ, a coalition of activists, which included members of APD Forward, as well as the Community Coalition and others, had pressured DOJ to investigate. And when DOJ did investigate, it was negotiating with the city. And there was a question, well, how do you get community input into this process? And so that was the place where I got involved, was trying to educate the community about places for community input into the reform process. That once we got to the court provided for a fairness hearing, and the different coalitions sort of formed in terms of coming in as amici. The focus of the Community Coalition began with one big thing. In most of these consent decrees and court-approved settlements around the country, race is a big issue. And there are provisions to prohibit racial biased policing. Albuquerque was different. The DOJ made no findings of racial bias and asked for no remedies within the, almost asked for no remedies within the CASA for it, but with one exception. But that was the focus of the Community Coalition. We were advocating provisions within the CASA to prohibit racial profiling and racially biased policing. The provisions that are in there to address this actually have to do with the collection of data, which we advocated, because that was one of the issues that DOJ didn't investigate. there was no data, no findings. And so there are provisions to collect and report demographic data in the court-approved settlement agreement. That includes Section 79, where the city is required to issue an annual use of force report. That's Section 250, Section 215, under which the APD is required to set up an early intervention, a computerized early intervention system that collects data, demographic data that can be used to access, and when I say assess and evaluate, determine whether or not there is racial bias. And then there's paragraph 298, in which the monitor has an obligation to collect and assess the outcomes under each of the provisions, but including the demographic data. And so that is something that we are interested in. The data is beginning to come out. The city issued its combined 2016-2019 annual use of force report. But the paragraph 298, there have been 3 of those thus far. There have been questions about the quality and accuracy of the data. And that's one of the things that we're pushing now is for the next paragraph 298 report to come out, and to make sure that the data that's collected is accurate. What I can tell you, and that city's 2016-2019 annual combined report is publicly available. It does show racial disparities in the use of force. It does not necessarily indicate how that happened, but it does show. And so we are interested in that data. But I would say that the various organizations and activists have been involved in advocating police reform in Albuquerque for many years. So that it's taken 6 years since the CASA, and this is where we are. And I keep getting this education because I'm frustrated that we've been doing this 6 years and we're still so far away from full compliance. And what I get is there was this history before that people are pushing. And so when I show optimism, when I show hope, I'm confronted with the history that was occurring here before then. And so I am still hopeful that the CASA can be effective. If you look at the provisions, because full compliance can be more than just checking the box. The way the CASA is designed, it really can bring about a transformation in culture. When you look at the provisions that are there, and that's something that we have advocated, some transformation of culture in policing that people can touch and feel. And the things that we are looking for specifically, we want a culture of constitutional policing. So those provisions in there about use of force, the force investigation provisions, the discipline, all of those can lead to a culture of constitutional policing. But we also want a culture of de-escalation, and there are provisions in there about that. A culture of community policing, and the community policing councils are a part of that. But it is broader in terms of being able to push to get that culture here. And it's more than just being able to have conversations with community or with community leaders. There's something larger in terms of the interaction and presence in communities. And it's not just that we talk to the community, but there's the real connections, relationships with the communities. We want a culture, this is related to where we came in, a culture of respectful, bias-free policing. And those data collection provisions that I just talked about, paragraph 215, which is a supervisory tool in terms of collecting data, can lead to just that, a culture of respectful, bias-free policing. And then that culture of accountability, of doing the force investigations and discipline that flows for it. It has been, so it has been 6 years. And I keep hearing from the time I stepped into this, that it takes time. We can change the culture, but it takes time. And that's what I'm saying. The people who have been involved in this for years have been hearing it takes time for 30, 40 years. And my view is it will take time, as much time as we say we're willing to give it. And I like setting time frames instead of saying it takes time. I want to know how much time are we talking about? Are we talking about another 6 years? Are we talking about another 10 years, 20 years? And I'm saying, no, it shouldn't be. I think we should start talking about months, specific years, and get it done. We should get police reform done. We should transform the culture so that we have this different relationship between community and police, that there's respect for police, the police able to do their jobs, a very different relationship. And that's what the Community Coalition is pushing for.
So, okay, so I don't see any questions. So I have written a few questions just for my own edification. So the annual use of force report, do you feel like it's comprehensive and specific enough to really provide the data that's needed to do analysis on it? I mean, you know, it's got to have quality and it has to be accurate, but are you really getting the information that you need? Because when I look at it, it looks pretty vague.
So the annual use of force is a beginning. It does not contain, it does not require data to be reported in the way paragraph 298 requires the monitor. As in the paragraph 298, it's there's some, because you don't just look overall, you look at it by area command, you look at it by type of use of force, and then you also are looking at it by the demographic data. And in paragraph 298, that then talks about being able to assess using ratios and making mean it. But data is useful. So even if we're not certain about the accuracy of the data that is available, you can use. And so it's actually paying attention to the data. And whatever the shortcomings of the annual use of force report may be, it contains some very interesting data. It talks about the types of call outs that the police get that lead to, which is the lead to use of force, but it shows you what type of calls result in the use of force, are more likely to result in use of force. Mm-hmm. Disturbances, family disputes, I forget, suspicious activity. I mean, but they talk about the different types of call outs, but it's providing more. It does have demographic data. It does show in terms of area command. So it does show that the Southeast Area Command has the highest number in terms of highest number of use of force incidents. The Northeast Heights Area Command is second. And so it's actually looking at to me, you look at the data, and it's not necessarily that you're using to point fingers, but you're using to say, oh, look at this. What can we do about this? What does this mean? Is this why is this happening? What can we do to change the numbers? So that's one thing, that if you have the data, it's not just reporting, it's using the data that you collect.
Okay. Lily, did you have a question? I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, and this may be a question we can do later with kind of have for all the panelists. But kind of what has been your viewpoint, or is it too early to tell, about the change in leadership in APD as to in improving compliance and changing the culture of APD. And as I said, it may be better for the whole panel, all the panelists when they're done.
Yeah.
I'm willing to wait.
Yeah, why don't we hold that one till the
Okay,
next group gets to go for?
okay. Yes, because that was one of my questions. Now that we've had new leadership for 8 months, you know, I'm anxious to hear. So another question that I had for Alfred was, you know, you're talking about 6 years. We've been waiting for 6 years. I mean, when we go to the amici meetings, when we go to the hearings, when we, you know, we talk about in the community policing councils, you know, we always talk about a change in culture at APD. And so I'm just wondering if there is a specific written document or some kind of plan that says, here's the strategy to move from, you know, the current culture to the culture that you've been describing tonight. I mean, and here are the measurements, here is, you know, here are the monthly goals, the 6-month goals that, you know, is somebody actively managing a plan in order to transition to a different culture?
I
I mean,
can't
have
speak.
we actually seen something?
Yeah, I can't speak for APD, but I would say no, we have not seen a change. We're not seeing a change yet. But a part of this, because Judge Browning has asked that question when we've spoken about transforming the culture, he has inquired about what that it means. And so one of the things that we have searched for are the words. What are we talking about when we saying let's transform the culture? And that's why tonight that we've gotten to the point where we can articulate this is what we mean when we talk about transforming the culture. That culture of constitutional policing, where the police, we eliminate excessive use of force incidents. That the police are following the Constitution. If there is, to the extent there is racially biased policing, that's a 14th Amendment violation. That we eliminate that. But we want to we're advocating what we see as what that culture should be. But there is no plan yet that I know of. But I think it's a good conversation for the community policing councils to have in terms of articulating what sort of culture. I think it's a good conversation for the police to have, for APD to talk about in terms of the culture that people see now. There's a culture I think that APD perceives that it has, and we may disagree. Maybe a difference of views as to what that culture is, but I think there should be these conversations and articulating what we mean by the culture that we want to end up with, that transformation of culture. And so that's the things I've articulated tonight is what we are advocating.
Okay. Thank you. I guess we will move to the next speaker, and that is Larry Cronin. And I'm not sure exactly what you're going to be presenting tonight, if it's going to be something about the Albuquerque Safety Coalition. I know you're involved in that. I know you're involved in the McClendon Settlement. So we'd like to learn a little bit about you and the work that you've been doing in police reform. So Larry?
Well, thank you. And a lot of the roles sort of intertwine, so I might be jumping from one aspect to another. I'm a local attorney here. I worked directly on the McClendon case and monitoring conditions at the jail for 9 years. I also work in family law in addition to my civil rights, representing children in guardianships and custody issues. So that's just a little bit about my background, but I've been working on McClendon in one way or another since, I think, 1998. McClendon was filed in 1995 about not only conditions in the jail, but there's a subclass that I've had the opportunity to be representing and advocating for it. And that's the people with mental health or developmental or behavioral health issues that have contact with law enforcement. And I'm also part of, with Peter Kubra, amici for the Department of Justice case, representing on behalf of those people. And those are the people who have constant and a large part of contact with the criminal justice system, who are at the jail, which is the largest provider of mental health and psychiatric services in the state. And so all these issues sort of intertwine. And so let me just start off by saying I agree with Mr. Lujan when he opened it up, saying we have to get away from this us versus them issue. And I think we need a change of how we look at what justice is, that it's just not punitive, lock them up, throw away the key, but look at the issues that cause that, bring the community together to look at how we approach justice, how we approach issues in our neighborhoods. Why are we calling the police on issues? Do we need to call the police on certain issues? A large part of those people who have been abused and killed by APD are part of our clientele, those with mental health or behavioral issues. And that showed up in the DOJ report and the use of force against those people. And so we're very concerned about how we approach that. And I think culture change definitely has to happen with APD in how they approach what policing is, but also with a community in what we expect out of the police and what we think of what we need the police for. And perhaps a lot of those things can be dealt with without calling the police. With McClendon and how that affects officers in the field, there's one of the last agreements in McClendon dealt with how officers deal with people with mental health or behavioral issues on the street. And lots of that agreement got instituted in APD's operating procedures. One of the aspects that more people know, probably not a lot of people even know that one of the policies is that the officers shall issue citations in lieu of arrests of petty misdemeanors. And a lot of people with mental health and behavioral health disabilities pick up a lot of petty misdemeanors, trespassing, jaywalking, loitering, various things like that. And so that's been incorporated, but there's an aspect of that sort of doesn't work because they get cited. A lot of times they don't have a home, they don't get notice of the hearing, they miss the hearing, they get a failure to appear warrant, and they get picked up later on and end up spending that time in jail. And so I think there needs to be a different approach of whether the people actually need to be cited for these things or whether those are just pure harassment type aspects of dealing with people on the street. Other aspects that have been incorporated in APD's standard operating procedures from that agreement in McClendon is when there is a call out for a behavioral health issue, somebody experiencing trauma or in crisis, that the ECIT officers take the lead. Or whether it's crisis intervention unit or those people who have specialized training take the lead on that issue. That the personnel shall take steps to calm the situation and, when feasible, eliminate emergency lights and sirens, assume a quiet, non-threatening tone, avoid physical contact, take time to assess the situation. Says time and distance are allies and there's no reason to rush or force the situation. That the officers should move slowly in order not to excite or agitate the individual. That the police are actually there to help. Lots of times people in crisis don't see that way, and with good reason, given the number of people who've been shot or otherwise harmed by the police when they're in crisis. The procedures say to speak slowly and use low tone of voice, that they shouldn't threaten the individual with arrest or physical harm. And it goes on. And I don't think in a large part, those policies are being followed, which brings out the issue of who gets called out in a crisis situation. There's not necessarily a crime involved. And so one of the things that has happened, the Albuquerque Community Safety Department has been formed to send out people without guns, not in uniforms, to address those situations. Now that's being developed, it's not in action yet, but I think that's one step in getting more community action and involved in these situations, taking the load off the police officers who aren't trained as social workers, who shouldn't be being called out to calls where there are no crime involved. And then they also, if they follow the policies involved, because they're still going to be involved in engaging people on the street, that there are methods that to de-escalate a situation so people aren't hurt. And then they can refer those situations to people who are better qualified to address that. So that's some of how McClendon affects the people on the street. I know that was sort of a subtext of what was asked to be approached. As a Miki in the Department of Justice. I'm sorry?
Oh, I was just going to ask, so with ACS coming on board, and them going to the calls where an armed officer would not need to be there. You were describing, an armed officer goes, and if someone is, for some petty misdemeanor, they're given a citation. So has it been determined if ACS will be handing out citations for these individuals that
they're not an enforcement agency. They're not an enforcement department. They are there to assess, provide services, whether it's initial services and then handing them off to other community members for continued continuity of care, or whether they bring them to somewhere where they can get services, although unfortunately we don't have a lot of those resources. So as part of the Coalition for a Safer Community, the two things that we advocate for is less contact with police in these situations, therefore less people are getting hurt, and building the resources in the community that we don't have. So one of the things I hear from officers a lot is, I have somebody in crisis, there's nowhere for me to bring them except to jail, where they then get some services. And so that's a big issue within the community. As far as the CASA and the hearing tomorrow, I'm I mean, we've been advocating these aspects, and we have high concerns about what the other amici have already addressed a little bit, the backsliding of APD, especially some of that is in training, but it's also, we got the policies written, we had the trainings going on, but when when the rubber hit the road in operational aspects, we're at 65 or below % compliance. And that's really not, acceptable. And that's mostly in use of force. And that's why DOJ was brought in, not necessarily to have good policies, but to address the use of force, and policy making is part of that process. We have issues with the recognition of when use of force is done, that the reports, especially the last 2 reports have addressed this, that the officers don't report the use of force, the supervisors don't, in their reviews, don't catch that there's use of force, therefore times of discipline and corrective action passes without anything happening. The APD has said, well, we just don't know how to do investigations of use of force, internal affairs investigations. And so the city and APD came up with this plan of EFIT. I forget right now what EFIT stands for. I had it written here.
External force.
External
Yeah.
force investigation.
External force investigation.
Which is people not associated with APD that have investigation background to do parallel investigations, to monitor APD investigations, and to help train and mentor APD investigators. I personally, I wonder, I question if APD says we don't know how to do investigations, how are they doing any investigations if they can't do internal affairs investigation? So I think there's an aspect or a suspicion on my part that it's not necessarily that they don't know how, but they haven't been willing to do that. And part of that is the investigators are part of the union. They're investigating fellow officers and they have an obligation. And I understand those conflicts of interests in doing that. And so now we're spending more money bringing in these people that perhaps will help. But part of that lack of investigation, letting the time limits lapse so that there's no discipline. I agree with my fellow amici that APOA, the police union, especially besides their actions out in the field, but this new campaign of Crime Matters More, which is also has the racial connotations in these days of Black Lives Matter, and then there were Blue Lives Matter, and now there's Crimes Matter More. And that the union president says that we can either fight crime or we can follow the reforms in the CASA, but we can't do both. And so that's, if that's the culture within and throughout APD, we have a big problem. And we need to address that in order to affect cultural change, in order to institute constitutional and community policing. And so I think some of that will be addressed tomorrow by the judge and see how the judge feels about the whole process. But I believe that both APD and the community has to reevaluate what justice is, how we interact with each other, how we interact as a community. And I invite the council and those who are listening to look at those issues and how we approach, how we, what we expect from the police, what's reasonable to expect from police, how we overload the police, expect them to be everything to everybody, and they can't be, and it's unfair to them. And we need to take some of that load off and let the community take the lead in addressing some of the issues, to let the community safety department take flight, and letting people without guns and weapons, just showing up with a gun and weapon escalates a situation. I know it happens with any encounter I might have with the police. And so I think we all need to look at that. And I hope I've explained a little bit how McClendon interacts in all these issues.
So I'm curious if there's anyone online that might be able to explain how the Crimes Matter More initiative even started. I mean, I think it was one of the CPC meetings, someone was asking about how the association decided to move forward with that. And I think one of the sergeants said, well, there's a meeting and however many people are at the meeting, they vote to do it, and then it just gets done. And it may not be a representative of all of the association members. And so is that something that maybe needs to be looked at as far as how those campaigns get initiated? And you know, is the voice of Sean Willoughby the voice of the majority or all of the officers involved in the association? I mean, I'm just kind of, you know, wondering that myself now.
To react also. Number one, I wouldn't put any officer who might be online in a position to counter what his union says, which also could put bring up issues of safety.
Right.
And so, you know, I myself don't expect any officer who is online with us today to be willing to take that stance, but I'm sure that that is not what every officer feels.
And if I would jump in there, I would say that these type of campaigns have sort of sprung up in the last year in response to people taking to the street and sort of speaking out against police violence. So while I think that I'm not necessarily happy about the campaign that the APOA launched, I think that is indicative of efforts by the Fraternal Order of Police nationwide to push back against reform efforts. So, but I agree with Mr. Cronin that, you know, it would be horrible to put these gentlemen on the line here to, you know, step their feet into that. It would be a nightmare for them. So.
Yeah, yes, this particular sergeant, I mean, he actually did explain kind of the process as far as how voting is concerned. And, you know, he was a bit reluctant to give us any more detail, but I mean, he actually told us this is kind of, you know, how decisions get made. And, you know, one of the panelists said, well, that's really kind of a scary situation. So, yeah.
I know from
I mean, maybe, you know,
conversations with, I'm sorry, I jumped over you.
No, go ahead.
I know from my conversations with individual officers that not all officers think that that was the campaign or the what's put forth by the union is what every member of APD, every officer, they don't necessarily feel that way.
And if I would say one more thing is about the culture change, right? I think, you know, the goal here, right, is to sort of reduce the power of police in some aspects. And that could be anything by codifying the current, because APD has like an outstanding use of force policy, right? It's a leader in the nation. especially with some tweaks, right? And as Mr. Cronin pointed out and Dean Matheson pointed out, if we can't hold people accountable, then those policies are null. So I think over time, speaking to the culture context, once some folks sort of grasp that this way of policing can, we produce the results we want, the cultural shift will start to occur, right? It's like water move boulders and rocks and like things over 100 years. It's slow but glacial, but I think if we have these policies in place, they will eventually lead to that culture change that you're asking about, Vicki.
Also, there's a community in Colorado, Longmont, Colorado. Granted, it's a much smaller community, but the police chief, Mike Butler, who's now retired, went in there. He led by example in what he wanted as cultural change. And over the years, he did that. And crime went way down. Community involvement went way up. The trust in the police department went way up. And I invite anybody here to Google Longmont and Police Chief Mike Butler and look at some of the actions that he's done. And he's a consultant all over the country now with restorative justice aspects, bringing that into the community. And so I think that's one example that we can look at, and changing the culture within, not only within the police department, but he did a lot of work on that, but also in building the trust and changing the culture in the community of how they approach police and what police work is.
Larry, I have a question for you in one of the statements that you made. You're stating that the coalition, one of the goals of the coalition is to change what policing is. What is your definition of what policing is?
I'm not sure who is that addressed to?
This is Rick Lujan.
Yeah.
Oh, Larry, it's to Larry. Oh, Baron, if you want to join in too.
No, that's actually Larry.
It's a nebulous type statement that I've heard.
That's Larry's question, but I would, that's Larry's question. Excuse me, but I'll chime in on it.
That's why we're here. We're here together. But, if that was the goal of the coalition, we have to have a common goal, and everybody has to have a commonality and understand. It's like when you talk about quality. When you say quality, one person thinks quality, 0 defects. Another person thinks quality is I can use it. So you have to come together to define what you believe what policing is.
Well, Mr. Lujan, and sorry, Larry, because that's really your question, but really quickly, I think the monitoring team, in the Department of Justice have laid out what policing is, right, through their court-approved settlement agreement, right? Those policies that have been offered up for the department to embrace and implement as what policing should look like, right? So I think that's a start. That's a start.
That's a good one. I like that response. Now, if we're all on the same roadmap, yeah, we can get there. But if this group says this is what policing is, and this group says this is what policing is, can we come together?
And right now, we just want to be what the Department of Justice is calling what policing is right now.
Very good. I like that.
That's the start, right?
That's good. That's the commonality. That's where we're supposed to be headed.
And
I agree.
And what I said about the Coalition for a Safer Albuquerque, our goals was to have less contact with the police in crisis situations.
Okay, I agree on that too. I know that we've had several, and one of the ones that comes into mind, it was years ago, and I can't remember the date or anything like that, there was an encounter on Central and Girard of a person in crisis, and APD approached, and there was one person in response approached, and she was knocked down, taken a gun, and shot.
Yeah, and I remember that case, and I remember the defendant, because, you know, full disclosure, I've been in jail more times, and that was Pham Duck. I remember that because
Right.
I remember that situation like it's in the back of my head. And I think if we consult Sergeant, I can't remember her name, I think, you know, her position from that experience was one that we need to embrace the mental health issues in our communities and work to address them. I remember the Zach case because, like I said, I knew Pham Duck, and I had known the sergeant because, once again, I've spent many times in jail in places of incarceration, been arrested way more times than I ever like to acknowledge in public. But I think it's a part of that. That acknowledgement is a way to change that culture, right? You know, I mean, it's a way to work to change that culture. But I remember that situation, and I do think that you know, overall, if we would treat mental health issues as public health crisis, we could have avoided that situation almost about 20 years ago. It was a long time ago.
It was a long time
ago. I think it was a Hollywood Video or Blockbuster there.
Right.
You know, I live on Girard, so I think that, you know, what you're speaking of, Mr. Lujan, sort of speaks to the change in the culture, right?
Right, exactly.
Mental health and addiction issues like the public health crisis that they are, and not law enforcement issues. So I think that's something that Larry spoke of, and Dean Matheson spoke of, and Elaine spoke of, right? And if we go that route, we'll eventually sort of ease these instances. Like I said, this is a lot. Someone described to me once that you know, policing reform is what you call obituary work, right? Because sometimes you don't see it. But I like Dean Matheson's thinking about, we need to start talking in months and not years, right? But some of these issues are obituary work, and they're gonna be like, well, Larry worked his tail off back in the day to reform police, right? Baron, you know, and so with that, I'm starting to ramble, so I'll be quiet.
I think
I totally like your answer. That's fantastic. We need a commonality, and that's what I see that this group is for, is we need the definition of, you know, if we go over there and say we need community policing, we need to change policing what it is, well, we need to come into consensus.
so Mr. Lujan, I would say that, given, like I said, I came into this, it's not something I specialize in, and so I have spent the last 6 years observing and learning a lot. And I would say within Albuquerque, we're not on the same page. I would say there's a large segment of the population who feel that the culture of APD is just fine. They are content with the way APD goes about its job. What I do think, though, is from the quarters that I'm with that group that disagrees. I do think we need conversation. It's not, I'm not necessarily think that it's sort of a common ground, but we do need conversation, and we need to listen to each other. And that the only way that we are going to get that transformation is by people who have these sort of different views. If you feel that you are protected by the police as they are now, the what you're going to say and what you feel is going to be different from what I would say. You know, about 6 months ago, my brother asked me a random question. He asked me, how many times have I been stopped by the police? And my first reaction, and then I started counting. And I lost count. I lost track. I've been stopped a lot. So in terms of, and I look at policing, when you get stopped at 3 a.m. in the morning for a dirty license plate, I've got, you know, I don't want policing that does that to me. And so, but I need to have a conversation with neighbors, with community. I need people to understand that my reality is different from yours. I'm not just saying you, but generally, I think people who have these different realities. And I would say that even in terms of the police, I see the need to have conversations with police.
Hey, Vicki, do you mind if I address the panel?
No, we'd love to hear from you, Commander Weber.
You know, I never know when to sort of chime in because it's your meeting. So thank you.
No, it's an open forum. So if you have comments or suggestions or ideas, feel free just to jump on in
I was going
whenever.
to say I appreciate the perspectives from these different groups. I think that one of the goals of the CPCs is to bring the conversation together. A lot of times when I go to community meetings, the conversation really centers around crime itself and not so much how do the police do business, but just what are the crime numbers? What are you doing to assist my neighborhood? Those types of questions, as you know. And so I appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations. I would disagree with, I thought Mr. Lujan asked a very important question, which is what is someone's definition of policing? And what I would disagree with is that the Justice Department defines what policing is, or that the CASA defines what policing is. The settlement agreement obligates and defines for us the culture that they expect us to build in APD in terms of how we police. I believe, and it is only my perspective, that the public, it is the community who decides what we police. In other words, you vote for people who enact laws. We are law enforcement, and our job really is to enforce the law. And then when you look at community policing, you know, our job is to work with the community to try to identify what causes crime and how can the police department and the community work together to eliminate those, you know, those causes, those root causes, as they call them, in community policing. How do you address those root causes so that you don't have the law breaking anymore, and therefore there is less police, you know, or there are less arrests, or there's less police contact with groups of people. So I really just wanted to put it out there that I think the public has to have a voice in that, and they do when they vote for representatives. But you know, that's part of these meetings is what is it? What are your priorities? What do you want the police department to do? And I think that as Mr. Matheson pointed out, there is a difference in what different areas of the city and what different groups of people want from the police. But I think that you know, at some point we have to reach a commonality, as Mr. Lujan said, about what is policing. And I don't believe the Justice Department is establishing that. What they're saying is, how should you ensure that it's constitutional? Whatever actions you're going to take as the police department, because that's what the community wants, how do you ensure that you have officers that are going about it constitutionally? Which is something that I support very much. And we all do, by the way. All police officers take an oath to uphold the Constitution. And are there people who go off the road? Yes, we know that. But overwhelmingly, the officers believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Constitution. And so we need to ensure that we're policing according to the Constitution. And so I guess I would just throw those comments out there for everyone's consideration.
And I fully agree with the acting commander that the community has to take the lead in defining what policing is and what justice is, which then leads to what policing is. And that's why I think that the community needs to take more actions and be more informed and take more responsibility for themselves and for their community. And I also agree with D. Matheson that I think a large part of the community is fine with how APD interacts with the community until it affects them or one of their families in a negative way.
I would say I agree that the public has a huge say in what policing is, But I would say that the public is also subject to the Constitution when it comes to the state use of force. And so the public can't say that they approve policing that's unconstitutional.
Right. So if the public is fine, well, okay, used a little extra use of force or used unnecessary use of force because that person deserved it, which is some of the community feels that way. Which is unconstitutional. And even though part of the community might feel that way and let them get their due, you know, it's not something that I think the community overall benefits from.
I would agree with you, but I would also say that no one should believe that I guess I would say the average police supervisor is any more okay with it than we don't have police supervisors who are looking at it going, yeah, okay, well, we know that a certain area of town thinks it's okay and therefore it is okay. I mean, their job is to look at what the officer under their command did, match it up with what they know the Constitution and what the policy is. And we use policy more than we use the direct Constitution because we're an agency that has policy. So, you know, I think that supervisors overwhelmingly, from what I've seen, do their best to evaluate their personnel.
Yeah, and I guess the next step in that would be to make sure they evaluate the personnel and work to hold them accountable when those violations take place. Because as long as we have that disconnect, that's the elephant in the room, right? A little bit. But I agree. I agree with you all. Stuff.
At one point, Commander, I was glad to hear you speak up, because one of the things that we are advocating, we think the police and the union should take a leadership role in moving toward full compliance with the CASA. And because I think it is ultimately, we won't have full compliance until the police are there and are doing it. And so it's vital.
I agree. I think, but as I said, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. I think that the officers want to uphold the Constitution. There is, I think when you talk about investigating use of force and that kind of thing, so I'm trying to get my train of thought here. I'm sort of thinking out loud, but you know, the overwhelmingly what I see is supervisors trying to do the right thing, and I do think that there are areas that we can improve upon, but the supervisors are trying to follow what they've been trained, and then sometimes questions come up. Well, is such and such thing, are we calling that a use of force or not? And I know that may seem to someone who doesn't, you know, do the job every day. My officers deal routinely with individuals who are, for example, intoxicated, and they're in handcuffs. They're trying to escort them to the car, and the person is maybe not willingly trying to get away or pull away, but just due to the fact that they're intoxicated, they're stumbling around, and there's a bit of a struggle to sort of keep everything on track because the officers have to hold on to them. They're not going to let go of them, and there will be times an officer will say, you know, should I call my supervisor? Is that a use of force? I didn't try to do anything to this person, but he fell down. I need to call my supervisor just to make sure. Those are the types of things that I think that someone watching video later might say, hey, you know what, I watched that and I do think right here you used force, but that doesn't mean that during that interaction that the officer necessarily recognized it right away. And I think that if that is interpreted by people to say they're just purposely not reporting, I don't think that's the case.
Part of what I see is I think about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and their 1 year turnaround. And one of the things that's probably has not gotten a lot of attention, the year before, Tampa Bay was the most penalized team in the NFL. They won the Super Bowl by greatly reducing the penalties. They went from the most penalized to somewhere in the middle of the pack. And I think that's culture. I mean, that was just that paying attention. It takes culture to bring that about. And I think about with use of force and when the officers don't know, and the data collection process. So when an officer is unsure, and then they fill out their use of there may not be a use of force report, or if there is, what happened is affected, and that affects what's in the data. And so, in terms of being able to analyze and to improve and get better, the problem's there. And that's why I'm going to culture. If we can get the reporting accurate, if we can get the officers making good decisions, we can reduce out of policy uses of force. We can reduce excessive force. You got to change in the culture, and it does not take another 6 years.
I agree with you on the data. It's very important. You have no disagreement from me. And as I said before, I find these discussions helpful. I think that most of our community meetings are always centered around crime, and that is what we do as a police department. So that's probably as it should be. But these discussions need to happen. So I appreciate the conversation.
And I appreciate you stepping in, because we need to hear from you, because the officers in APD are part of our community too.
Agreed. And one thing, Vicki, just because it's on my mind, and this is kind of related, so I'll just throw it out there now. I know that you have not seen just a rank and file officer at one of your meetings for a while. That's mostly due to the way we're conducting the meetings right now with the pandemic, and I'm hopeful that we're going to go back to in-person meetings soon. And when that happens, it's fully my intention. It's always been my intention to have because you can hear from me as an area supervisor, but I think I think it's good for the officers themselves to hear from you all, and I think it's good for you to hear from them rather than just me as an administrator.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I think you're more than an administrator myself. But.
Yeah, thank you for joining the conversation.
Yeah. So how do we have more of these kinds of conversations? I mean, it sounds like, we've got things to talk about, obviously, with the monitoring report. We're constantly talking about change of culture. So how do we get around a table with the people that can have the influence and start making some decisions and start talking to each other, like Rick was saying? How do we get out of this us versus them, contentious situation? How do we start working together? I mean, what do people suggest that we do?
It's a matter of building trust. And we're in this group together right now. And one of the things is, am I going to speak my mind? Am I going to get, I don't want to say attacked, but argued that I did speak up and I did, so it's a bit of fear factor. And this is what is driving us in this area of pandemic is fear. And fear is a controlling substance. It's terrible. It makes you stay at home. It makes you get Grubhub all the time. You don't want to interact anymore. So one of the things that we need to do is build trust. And this is what this conversation bases, Commander Weber spoke up and stated what he felt, and Larry spoke up and said what he felt. And we're building this relationship within the group that I trust you to listen to me. And that's a big thing, is are we actively listening to what the other person is saying? And if we sit there and go over there and learn what trust is to each one of us, it's just like what I said, what is policing? Trust is something different to every one of us, just like I said, what quality is. If we come into a commonality, that's the basis where everybody starts working and building trust and building a relationship to make change. So that's just my opinion.
Okay, so we have several comments and a few questions in the chat. I wanted to get to those before the end of the evening. But I do want people to think about how we're going to get together. You know, I mean, I feel like, you know, do we know each other? I mean, Commander Weber, have you had a chance to, you know, to sit down and talk with Larry and Alfred and Baron? I mean, do you know them? Do you know what's going on in their head? Do you know how they feel? Do they know how you feel? I mean, how do we bring that together? I mean, I don't know the answer, but it sounds like that's what everybody's saying that we need to do. So how do we take action to move in that direction? You know, and it's probably not something we can answer tonight, but I just wanted to put that out there for people to, you know, to start thinking about it, because it seems like there's this, you know, like Rick was saying, this antagonistic attitude, you know, us versus them. And, you know, in order for us to work together and work as a community, you know, we're going to have to get over that. And so, you know, how do we do that? So I'm just going to leave that out there, and we can think about it. Maybe we can get together another time and have another discussion on that. But I did want to get to some of the questions. So I think this is for, is it Dean Matheson? Does the data reflect number of minority officers, and would greater numbers affect respectful culture?
Well,
and I think we were talking about maybe. Go ahead.
So the data on the demographic composition of the police force is not a part of, I don't think it's a part of the annual use of force report itself, but that information is available. I would say that yes, that a force that where the demographics are sort of reflective of the community would be helpful, but I think it's more than that. It's helpful to have police who are part of the community. That it's not just that you're here as an officer. I think it's helpful when people see officers in context other than when they're just serving as a police. That and that's to me the part of community policing is like it's not just interacting as an officer; it's being a part of communities that you police.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, I'm assuming it's the presenters here. They're saying their role of the CPCs, especially the change of department from APD to CPOA. And do they feel that DOJ needs to take APD into receivership or whatever it is called to take on APD? Is that right, Willie? Is that what your question was?
That's definitely a lawyer question. Excuse me.
That's a loaded question?
No, a lawyer question. Excuse, not loaded.
Oh, a lawyer question.
And loaded.
Oh, okay.
It is loaded.
Yes, loaded.
Well, you know, we have to have difficult conversations, and we have to ask hard questions in order to get to the bottom of things, in order to get the truth, in order to start building that trusting relationship. So, you know.
Yes, Vicki, those were my questions is what are their views of how the CPCs are working? And the CPCs themselves have had discussions about being moved from being APD supervised to being supervised or reporting to the CPOAs. And we aren't sure either is a good idea particularly. So I wanted to know if you all had any feelings about where should the CPCs fall under an organizational structure? And then the second question is, there's been some talk also about should APD be taken over by the Department of Justice because they're going so slowly, and what your all's feelings about that issue was. Along with another question is what are your feelings about the change in leadership? Have you seen any significant improvement, or how do you think that's going, or is it too early to tell?
I would chime in on the CPCs. I know, when I first came on with the ACLU about 3 or 4 years ago, I came from being a reporter, a newspaper reporter, and I thought the CPCs up until a couple of years ago, and I must admit that I need to like increase my involvement in these meetings. But it seems as if it was an extension of APD, right? An extension of APD, as Commander Weber pointed out. There's a lot of talk about crime and crime numbers, but very little conversation about what can be done to change the culture and to get us on track. So just my assessment being here today is that I think there's a stark difference in how these are ran. So whomever oversees them right now, I think is going in the right direction. And then the weigh in really quickly on the whether or not the command structure is making a difference. The verdict is out on that, but what I do know is that although the chief just really sort of took on that interim position in October or something, that slowdown in investigation started in August, and then they sort of stopped in September. So that was clearly under the command structure that's in place now. So but I do like to defer to the monitor's report, who I think somewhere in that report, in that 300-page report, put the onus on. No, it sort of said that we need to give the command structure time to do it. So the puttings and the proof of the 14th report when that comes out, to see if Superintendent Stanley and Medina was able to get a hold on some of what the monitor has determined was the counter CASA effect. So
I would say, let me start with the CPC and then wind my way back to those other questions to the extent I can remember. One, I think the language that you use about the CPC's reporting to the police or something like that under the police, I think that in order to have the relationship and to have the conversation, I do think there needs to be some independence from the police, but there needs to be a relationship. So so the CPCs they have the independence to raise the tough issues with the police, but there's relationships where they can have the conversation. So I think that's I think moving it to the CPOA is probably better than having it under the police, but there needs to be a relationship. With respect to the takeover, whether DOJ should seek a receiver, I'm going to start with the leadership change. I do think the change in that this leadership structure, not just a change in leadership, but the leadership structure itself, I think it should have a chance to succeed. But I do not say we should give it time to succeed. I think we should give it a specific time in which to succeed. Because otherwise this conversation will be going on 6 years from now. And I want to see that ended. I would say that the position of the community coalition has been, as we have looked at monitor report after monitor report, and there's IMR 12, and then there's IMR 13. These are not good reports for APD. And looking at what the monitor is reporting, I have doubts that APD can do it on its own. And I would think that if the reports continue to be the same, DOJ should either seek a receiver, but they should take tougher measures to bring about compliance. And that's why I think if the APD itself, if the union would take a leadership role in bringing about full compliance, it would change the reports. And I think if the rank and file respond to the change of leadership structure, it can change the reports. and one of the things I have attended a number of webinars lately on police reform, but I keep hearing about people should pay attention to what happened in Camden. And what you heard at the beginning with Camden was this police abolition, but that's not what happened in Camden. They rebuilt the police force. And I've seen some of the videos of the chief talking to the new officers and about the awesome responsibility that police are given, that the police are the only government agency in which they have the authority to use force against its citizens. And that is a huge responsibility. And it's just the sort of the tone of trying to change things. And so in Camden, they actually did build a new culture and change the relationship, and they reduced crime in the process of doing it. So I think it's possible. The Longmont story is possible to do it, but I do think in the end, even if DOJ were to get tougher, it's still going to require the police to be involved in changing the culture and bringing about full compliance.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question that is for Commander Weber, and this is from Janice. She's saying, our neighborhood had a nuisance property. We were told by APD that they were unable to make any arrests because of the McClendon Settlement. We were consistently told the same thing by different officers during the year-long nuisance problem. We were told they couldn't do anything unless they saw the violation happening themselves, even though we had witnesses and pictures. Are APD officers trained to hold the McClendon Settlement accountable for the reason they're unable to make misdemeanor arrests?
So the answer to that is no, officers are not told or trained to, I think what I'm getting at, if I'm interpreting the question correctly, is that the person has some belief that officers have been trained to scapegoat the McClendon lawsuit as a reason that they can't do anything. For misdemeanor arrest authority, this has nothing to do with McClendon specifically. There are only certain misdemeanors that officers may arrest without observing the violation themselves. So domestic violence is one. I think leaving the scene of a crash is one. Shoplifting is one, depending on the dollar value. So there's only a handful of arrests that officers can make for a misdemeanor unless it occurs in their presence, i.e. they have to see it for themselves. So when they show up after the fact and someone says, I have video of so-and-so inside my residence, that's inside this property in which they're not allowed to be in, for example, that is terrific evidence that we can use to cite someone into court or to summons them if we don't have contact with them. Like, let's say we can't find them, they're gone. So we know who they are, but they're gone. Then we can summons them into court and use that evidence, use the individual, the caller's video or whatever you have, witness statements. All of those things can go to court so that a judge could find someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, potentially. But the officer does not have the authority to make an arrest on most of the misdemeanors unless they witness it. And that is the state law, and that's fairly consistent across the country, although it varies a little bit. And so that has nothing to do with the McClendon settlement.
And I don't believe that officers are trained to blame McClendon. Oh, I can't do that because of McClendon. And there is nothing in any of the settlement agreements, McClendon or the CASA, that prevents officers from doing their job.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we have one comment here. I humbly suggest the advocates tour the RBT, which is the reality-based training view a training session and go for a ride along with an officer. We need to walk in each other's shoes. Well, that was just a comment. And that was one question that I was going to ask was to our panelists was, do you do ride-alongs?
That, from my understanding, that was something that was offered in a reality-based training, and somehow it got discontinued, and that was one of our requests of the command staff during our last sort of status conference with APD command staff to re-engage that process and that reality-based training, because I do think that it would go a long way to help us, really understand what goes out there on the street. So that's something that we're exploring right now, and Elaine is really working hard to make that happen. So Elaine and the folks at APD to sort of reinvigorate that program.
Yeah, that's commentary that I'm happy to pass on to the chief's office. Probably my guess would be with reality-based training, if there were plans and then it didn't happen, that's probably for the same reason that for the last year we did not have officers at the reality-based training center either. So obviously we've started back up again, and I will pass on that commentary to the chief.
And in the past, but it's also been pandemic, I've discussed doing that with the chief.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also,
but as far as ride-alongs, I mean, are all of the amici allowed to do ride-alongs with the officers? I know we are, CPOA is, but like if someone, like if Mr. Cronin or Mr. Jones would like to do a ride-along, is that something that could happen? Or
I would be happy to arrange for anyone who's interested. Now we do have there's a waiver that has to be filled out, and there are some background requirements. Just because we are putting somebody in a police car, and we are, as the city, we're taking liability for that person when we take them to a call where something's going on. We have to know that we're not introducing someone who's maybe unpredictable, let's say, into a situation. So for the most part, I don't think that applies to many people who are on the panel, but yeah, I would be happy to try and facilitate a ride along for anyone who's interested.
thank you, Commander.
okay, thanks, Commander. We have one more question. Should we be assessing police conduct and culture without also considering the role of the courts in law enforcement and the fact that there are many more laws on the books that can be enforced, leading to a lot of discretion by police, district attorneys, etc.? And I think Mr. Jones had a comment in the chat.
Oh, no, I apologize. I was just letting Representative Matthews know that we can chat about that offline, because I do think that when you talk about reforming systems of the criminal legal system, it does require all components. And I think that, while police officers are our most visible government employees, so we always want to focus on law enforcement, but there's DAs, there's court systems. I think here in New Mexico that they're funded to examine the criminal code, and I think things like that will go a long way to bringing a holistic approach to improving public safety, policing, and all that stuff. So yeah, no, I agree 100%, and I think it's incumbent on us advocates to make sure we explore all avenues for this, because as folks said, when we talk about the same thing, when we ask all the law enforcement officers and law enforcement folks to handle all these complex issues that they're not necessarily equipped with, right? I think it's the same thing on the other end when we want to shape a policing system that is so interconnected and with so many other systems in our state. So.
Yeah, I think that what winds up with police reform, we wind up focusing just on the police, as is the problem is just the police. but there are other things happening in communities that need to address in terms of making them safer, of alternatives. I mean, if you build stronger communities, if you're investing in communities, I think that you can reduce crime, and that's another way to sort of to reduce interactions with police as officers necessarily, because I think it can lead to just improving the relationship. But I do think we have to look at things other than just trying to reform the police, and that's not just a relationship, but to reduce crime.
And I would add one more thing that, I mean, that comment, it talked about the systems, but I also think that there's some investment in communities, right? I think, what we've heard over the last year, folks have used really poor messaging with it, in my opinion, right? But we need to sort of start reinvesting, because as we mentioned, right, Larry, the Miki, the McClendon folks work with folks who are suffering mental health illnesses. But when you look in a community, there's a dearth of services, right? You know what I mean? There's no way in the world we're going to get all the people services we need. And so if we work on that, that could be another component. And as Commander Weber pointed out, it then reduces the role and the need for police, right? So it's definitely not just the law enforcement community that have to bear this burden of improving policing. There's so many things going that interplay that we need to sort of look at and address if we want to, get to the policing that Mr. Lujan was challenging us to define.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm thinking maybe that I'll talk to the council members in the Northeast to see if we could present a recommendation that amici and community members that have a major stake in this, like presenters this evening, and APD leadership, let's get together and sit around a table and just talk and get to know each other and come up with 2 things that we can work on to improve the safety of our community. Just let's see if we can just agree on, 2 things that we can work on. We've talked a lot about tonight. There's a lot of issues. They're huge issues. They're huge social issues, a lot of contributing factors. But is there a few things that we could agree on and then start working on those together? So we'll think about that. I think we'll put that recommendation together. Even if we don't do it as a council, I will do it as a separate community member and put in a recommendation so we can start a conversation. Let's see. So we've got about 6 minutes left. Not sure if we have Sergeant Sims. Do we have enough time to do a quick presentation from APD on Northeast?
Yes.
Sorry, we went over, but I really didn't want to. I thought we had some really good dialogue going on, and I didn't want to.
No, totally understandable. I will be quick. Okay, so this data is from March 1st, or I'm sorry, May 1st through the end of May 31st. Property crimes, larceny, shoplifting, fraud, forgery, 132. Auto burglary, 54. Vandalism, 0. Auto theft, 48. Recovered stolen vehicles, 11. Commercial burglary, 18. Residential burglary, 17. And disturbance, 75. Crimes pertaining to that of person, family offenses, 276. Kidnapping, 0. Fight in progress, 12. Aggravated assault and battery, 74. Robbery, all types, 27. Criminal sexual penetration, 8. And homicides, 2. Total calls for service in the Northeast Area Command for the month of May was 8,483. Moving into the use of force report in the Northeast, last month we had 4 level 1s, 9 level 2s, 4 level 3s, which brought us to a total of 17 total uses of force. Force per 1,000 calls for the Northeast, we were right at 2.
At 2?
2. Yeah, two per 1,000 calls.
Yeah, okay. That's a little higher than normal, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was last month, but yes, I do believe you're correct. It rose a little bit from the previous months.
Okay.
In terms of the breakdown of statistical data for use of force, calls associated with use of force, disturbance calls 13, family dispute 10, aggravated assault battery 9, as well as suspicious person and vehicle were both at 9. Continuation of earlier force event 6, wanted person 5, drunk driver 4, suicide and SWAT were both at 3. On-site suspicious person or vehicle, auto theft and vandalism were all at 2. And stolen vehicle found, on-site disturbance, burglary of a residential dwelling, shooting, fight in progress, armed robbery, commercial, shots fired, and armed robbery of an individual were all at 1.
Okay. Any questions or comments at all tonight from the council members? We've got like 1 minute, but I mean, we can go, you know, we can go over and people can drop off as they need if we want to continue the conversation.
I'd like to make a quick comment on something that Dean Matheson brought up earlier, that it's that we shouldn't confuse community-oriented policing with community engagement. Community policing is a philosophy where the community should be allowed to be co-producers in law enforcement, working hand in hand with the police on solving neighborhood problems. So I thought that was an important point, Dean Matheson.
Okay, I think that's everything for this evening. I wanted to thank all of our guests. I love it when we have spirited discussions and issues are brought to the public and issues are brought to APD. I think that's a major hurdle in trying to accomplish what everybody's been talking about this evening, changing the culture, helping community, being more a part of our community, being inclusive. It's all a part of it. And so I thought it was a really great conversation. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you, Commander Weber. And we'd love to have you back at some point to chat some more. Conversation is good and listening is good. So thank you all this evening for joining us. And I guess we'll see you tomorrow at the hearing.
And thanks for the invite. I think I can say
Okay.
for all the amici who are present here.
Yes, thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Okay. Thank you all.